Oh, yes, the joy of planning for a substitute. Sometimes having the thought of planning for a substitute makes us rather just go to work sick. Let's talk about planning for a substitute today. So, our objectives. What to include in your sub packet. What to include in your sub plans. Those are two separate things. How to prepare for a long-term sub, making emergency sub plans, and sub plan tips. I'm Tammy, the OWL teacher, and we are going to get started. So let's talk about things to include in your sub packet. Now, sub packet is where you will put your sub plans. It's where you include what you include everything in. So the first thing you're going to have is your schedule, and that will be what time you go where. Then you will have your updated seating chart. What I always do is I do pictures, like when at the beginning of the year, kind of after they do pictures for the yearbook, we always get those little sticky ones. I take the sticky ones, and what I do is I always go through and I kind of peel them off and I use those. Another thing that I have done in the past is I have taken pictures of my students in front of a blank bulletin board at the beginning of the year, and I have gotten those pictures actually printed out, and I have cut them into little squares, so I have just the student's head, and then I have laminated them, and then put a little piece of tape on the back, and then I moved them around, so that is my seating chart of pictures with their name underneath it. You also want to include emergency procedures in your sub packet because you never know when there will be a real fire drill or tornado or whatever the case is, depending on what state you live in. But you never know when there will be an actual practice drill too. So you always want to include those in your sub packet, just in case. Then you want to have a calendar of special events. This is important because there very well could be an assembly on the day that you're gone. There could be, I don't know, a student's birthday or just something important that you need to focus on. Have your classroom management information. So for instance, if you use the clip chart, you want to make sure that you have that explained in detail for your sub, so that way your sub can make sure that that is how he or she handles it while you are away, along with information about your students. You also want to try to include a school map with your main places highlighted. So for instance, I always have in my school map, I will have like my library highlighted, my gym highlighted, my cafeteria highlighted. That way my sub will know how to get the students to those places during those days. You also might want to have a staff extension, so that way if the sub needs to call the office or needs to call a teacher across the hall or a special education teacher, the sub is able to do that. A class list. I always include a class list with my students' names, and then beside their names, I always write out just a little blurb about each student. For instance, you know, this student likes to talk regularly, this student would be a really good helper, this student leaves for pull-out during reading, this student uses the bathroom frequently, this student has permission to go to the library during reading, whatever the case may be. I also sometimes include a substitute feedback form because I like to hear back from the sub on how they felt the day went during my class, because that kind of gives me an idea on whether or not I want to invite the sub back and whether or not the sub wants to come back. Some subs have not left me notes, and I don't know how you feel about it, but that's frustrating to me because I don't like to come back and not know how my day went. So that feedback form is a great way to find out. And then of course your lesson plans and any handouts that you need for those lesson plans. Now let's talk about the actual lesson plans themselves. So the things that I just talked about in the sub packet, all of those things should stay there with your packet every single time you have a sub. So you should never really have to change any of those materials each time you have a sub. The only thing that you would have to change theoretically is the lesson plan. So once you do that sub packet, once you're done. The only thing you'd have to put in there then is lesson plans each time. So let's talk about those lesson plans. In your lesson plans, you want to include things such as where to locate things in the classroom. For example, your lunch slips or your attendance slips, your office forms, your hall passes, so on and so forth. The times and locations of classroom occurrences. So we will start reading at 10:05 and end reading at 11:20, for instance. You want to include specific, explicit details, because if you don't include specific, explicit details, then there's room for interpretation. And room for interpretation means that your class lesson plans will not be done the way that you want it done. And that means you may have to reteach. And if you're anything like me, you don't want to have to come back and reteach, because then it was pointless to take a day and now you're a day behind. Classroom routines and procedures, you want to include those. That includes like using the bathroom and getting water from the water fountain or having water bottles in the classroom. How you use technology or computers in the classroom. Your lunch and recess procedures. Sharpening pencils, arrival and dismissal procedures. Some of this stuff can be written up ahead of time and also included in your lesson plan packet, so you don't have to rewrite this each time. It can go with your classroom management. You also want to include how you grade and your gradebook information. This is for long-term substitute, but I also like to put it in with my regular sub. And the reason I do that is because I always hope that maybe if I put it in there with my regular sub, he or she might get bored and be willing to grade a thing or two. But it doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. Continuing on with long-term sub, you also want to include how you lesson plan, including your scope and sequence on what you're going to do during what months and what is kind of expected. However, when you have a long-term sub, that does not always get followed. Sometimes they lesson plan in their own ways, and you just have to kind of accept it, as long as the students are still learning what they need to learn. You want to explain your classroom routines and procedures for everything, including your homework and each subject area. You want to include your copying information, such as the copy code and any school rules that need to be followed and abide by. And then you want to include a calendar of long-term events, including committee meetings, staff meetings, testing, whatever that your long-term sub will have to do or attend while you're away. You also want to include information for your long-term sub regarding progress monitoring, intervention data, and information. And then again, this is an example of my class list. I just kind of took their names and hit them on the left side, but classroom information such as allergies, medical needs, character of the month, and so on. So you can see over on the right, I do have things like accelerated math, reading, focus, can be talkative, needs redirection, an ESOL student can have an attitude, needs redirection, possible hypertension, can go to the bathroom anytime, doctor's note, so on and so forth. Communication method. You need to explain to the long-term substitute what is expected as far as communication goes with your parents. You want to include like your newsletters or even your website, and so that is maintained. And then you need to suggested to have at least 3 days of subplans on file. We're talking about emergency subplans, I'm sorry. I wondered why that didn't make sense. When you are doing the emergency subplans, at the beginning of the year, what I do is while I'm planning and preparing my room for the school year, I always create at least 3 days of subplans on file. That way I have them ready to go if I'm ever absent, something happens, like a car accident, or I end up in the hospital and I'm just not able to make it in. They can just go to that file and they're able to pull them out. And I have a set also in my classroom, but we put a set in the office. But I have a set in my classroom, and a colleague across the hall knows where they are, so she can come in and just grab them if she needs them. It is actually best to have one for each day of the week, but honestly, I don't. I just have 3 days and call it good. But store them in a place that's easy to find. And then, like I said, let somebody know where they can find them, so that way they don't have to contact you. That will make it a lot easier. And then have activities that can be done independently by the students, because if they're emergency subplans, they're not going to know where you are in the curriculum. They're not going to know what the students already know and don't know. So you want to try to pull stuff that they already know, like skills that have been previously taught. So for an example, if you're in 3rd grade, you may want to do things that have been taught in 2nd grade. Maybe, for an example, if you are in 3rd grade, maybe you want to pull multiplication facts that they can practice. And then don't put things in there that are just fluff. It does need to have value. And then include more than enough for when you're gone, because oftentimes when you are not there, the sub tends to go through things a lot faster. And then include master copies if you need to, so that way the substitute can run and make more copies if they need to, because you never know, maybe you have more students now and they don't have enough copies, or just maybe they ran out of things to do and they need to go make another copy. And then look online. A lot of times you can find emergency subplans online. You can find them for free. You can also find them online paid on TPT. And then, like I said before, it's best to prepare the emergency subplans before school even starts. Some subplan tips. These are an example to the right there. These are my emergency subplans number 1. Consider adding pictures to your plans, as the majority of the people are visual. While mine are not pictures, I do have them formatted so that they are easy to read. I use bullets, bold fonts, underlining, highlighting, tabbing, and white space. I use consistency throughout the plans. And then I have a master copy that's saved to my computer, so I can just go through and just quickly delete what I need to delete for my regular plans. And then I have extra materials, more extra materials than what's planned. And remember, it doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to be there so they have materials that they need. And then make sure that your sub collects everything at the end of the day, all of the work. And the reason I say this is because at the end of the day, when everything is collected, number 1, it gives you an idea of what students are absent, because sometimes subs just don't tell you. And if they do, they may not be correct because they don't know all the students. And number 2, it gives you an idea of how well the students did during that time. So for instance, if the majority of the students have completed 3/4 of the page, but little Johnny only has 1/4 of the page done, then you know either little Johnny didn't understand it, or little Johnny was spending too much time off task, and that gives you an idea on what was going on during that time. So that kind of gives you an idea on what's going on. And then you don't have to worry about kind of figuring out, okay, what do they do during this time and hunting those papers down. And that is it.